Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I've been an avid hunter ever since my father first took me out to the woods as a young boy. There's just something special about spending time outdoors with good company, filling your freezer with food you harvested yourself. So when I finally had the means to purchase a large parcel of wooded land, I jumped at the opportunity. The 500-acre preserve became my pride and joy. I worked hard to maintain the health of the forest, ensuring there was plenty of food and cover for the wildlife. In turn, they provided me with some of the best hunting I've ever experienced. Deer, turkey, rabbits, you name it, my land had it. My favorite hunting companions were my two dogs, Rex and Buck. Those boys lived for our trips into the woods. Their noses would be glued to the ground, searching for the faintest scent as we crept through the brush. I'd follow stealthily behind, senses on high alert. My trusty rifle slung over my shoulder accompanied me on every hunt. One crisp fall morning, we were a few hours into a deer stalk when Rex's ears suddenly perked up. I followed his gaze uphill to see a county sheriff approaching. His hand rested casually on his holstered sidearm. Now, in all my years hunting, I'd never been questioned or harassed by law enforcement, but something about this encounter already had me on edge. "Morning, officer," I greeted politely. "Something I can help you with today? You're hunting with that there?" He gestured to my rifle with a look of distaste. "Yes, sir, this is my land. I'm well within my rights to have it." The deputy shook his head. "I'm afraid not. This county has a strict no firearms ordinance. It's illegal for you to have that weapon, much less hunt with it. I'm going to have to confiscate it." I looked at him in disbelief. In all my time as a landowner and hunter, I'd never heard of such an ordinance. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," I said evenly. "There's no law against hunting on private property. Now, if you don't mind, my dogs and I would like to get back to it." I turned to walk away when his next words stopped me cold. "Don't make me arrest you, son. Turn over the rifle now before this gets ugly." My jaw clenched in anger. How dare this guy march onto my private land and threaten me over a lawful activity? I decided arguing was futile, so I reluctantly handed the rifle over. "This isn't over," I warned through gritted teeth. The deputy just smirked and sauntered off with my confiscated firearm. As soon as he left, I pulled out my cell and called my lawyer. I explained the bizarre interaction, and he agreed the officer's claims were absurd. After doing some research, he confirmed no such ordinance existed. In fact, state law expressly permitted hunting on private property outside city limits. This cop clearly didn't know the laws he was supposed to enforce. With my lawyer's encouragement, I filed an official complaint against the deputy. I described his ignorant accusations, illegal seizure of my rifle, and blatant disregard for my rights as a landowner. A few weeks later, I received a call from the police chief himself, apologizing profusely for his officer's egregious error. Apparently, my complaint launched an internal investigation, revealing a troubling pattern of misconduct. The deputy was promptly terminated. The chief assured me they wanted to make things right. I was reimbursed for my rifle and even given a hefty settlement check for my trouble. But most satisfying was having that crooked cop kicked off the force for his harassment of law-abiding citizens. I celebrated by taking my loyal dogs on a celebratory hunt, grateful to have the freedom to enjoy my beloved pastime in peace. The preserve seemed fuller than ever with wildlife that season. It was as if the creatures could sense the land was once again safe for them and their rightful caretaker. With renewed passion, I nurtured that haven of nature. No longer did I worry about being accosted each time I shouldered my rifle and stepped into the woods. Justice had been served, and I could proudly uphold the hunting heritage my father instilled in me so many years ago. The memory of that encounter will always serve as a reminder. Tyranny and corruption must never be tolerated, no matter who the perpetrator. And we must be vigilant in defending our liberties, for it is our solemn responsibility to protect the innocent, both man and beast. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Okay, I'll share another revenge story. I'm only vengeful when someone deserves it, and that's usually often, so I'll share one I did in 2011. Anyone who has seen my posts knows I used to work in the private security field. Not mall cops, but highly trained, skilled, and armed security personnel. We worked in residential buildings and complexes that were very high-end, like those with $200,000 cars in the parking garages. Now, places like this are Karen Central. Imagine apartments full of Karens and entitled teenagers. The company owner was awesome. He was a cop in his regular job, so he understood what we faced. His advice was to be nice, but put the hammer down if you have to, and not take their nonsense. Also, if we didn't get 2 complaints a month about us for worthless stuff, that we weren't engaging the residents enough. So this is important to the revenge part. Each supervisor had 10, 15 properties under their control. Regular officers patrolled them, but we were in charge of helping with evictions, attending town halls on security issues, deciding how an officer patrols, or updating what areas were problematic or needed checking. I had 12 properties. Now, in this one apartment complex, we had a couple who always called us. We had an emergency line open from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. When we got there, they complained about their upstairs neighbor. It was a list of things they just changed: stomping, music, talking, cooking smells, their dog going #1 on the balcony, and it dripping onto theirs. These were valid complaints, but we never found evidence to support them. When they saw we were starting to question if they were real, they changed tactics and went racist. The couple above them were a sweet and wonderful middle-aged Asian couple. The husband was an immigrant, but the wife was born and raised American. These racist cretins had only talked to the husband, so they assumed, as all racists do, that they were both immigrants. So this white sheet-wearing couple started making comments like "those Asians," and "they are in America, why can't they cook American food?" and "I'm afraid to be in the parking garage when one of them is driving in it." While it angered me, those comments alone weren't enough for an eviction. The only thing I could do was have my officers put the exact phrasing in the report. I did ask the property manager about the comments, and she said if they didn't say them to the residents and the residents didn't complain, there wasn't much she could do. So I tried to think of some way to get them evicted. Not only were they lying to get a couple evicted, but they were also calling in false things and wasting the officers' time to respond. And they didn't call just every once in a while. They called sometimes twice in one night, usually 5, 8 times a week. A month later, the opportunity was handed to me. The Asian couple called me during the day and informed me they were going out of the country to China for 2 weeks and no one would be in their apartment. They told me this just in case the other couple started complaining, so I would know they were lying, and they asked me to check their door once a night to make sure it was locked and not broken into. I informed the Asian couple not to tell their neighbor or anyone else except the property manager. We had a patrol meeting that night. Officers didn't work in one specific region, so I told them all my plan. I wanted them to respond each time they called, write down exactly what they said happened, and also note any racial terms, no matter how minor. Mark the report as urgent and send it out. We had an online system for all business, email, schedules, report submitting, you get the idea. So away we go. During those 14 days, they complained 18 times. Everything was documented, and I took it to the manager. She looked it over and said, "Let's evict them." A side note. The client got charged more for emergency response than for regular patrols, meaning their lies were costing money. So there was no homeowners association because they were rentals. In this situation, myself, the property manager, and the tenants sat down at a table. The charges for eviction were read. If the eviction was security related, then I would state what violations had been broken, etc. Not opinions, just facts based on the reports, which the tenants received a copy of. Then the tenants had the right to speak and ask questions. The property manager then decided what happened next. Do they stay or do they go? They were sent a formal letter stating they were facing eviction and had 10 days to set up a meeting. If not, the eviction would be processed. They set one up. I arrived and the troublesome couple and the manager were already present. The wife immediately confronted me because I was armed. Uniforms for those situations consisted of a dress shirt, slacks, tie, one weapon, and one magazine. Things like evictions can be dangerous. I politely informed her that it was my uniform and it wasn't her call to make. She tried to say she felt uncomfortable and wanted to reschedule, but the manager said this happens now or I will evict you, so they agreed to continue. Now, for legal reasons, these sessions were recorded by video, so tenants couldn't lie in eviction court or sue. In front of me were all 18 reports, and we went over each one: time, date, who called, apartment number. I also read out each line, telling them to tell me what they felt was false and what was true. The only thing they denied was the racial terms. At the end of each report, I basically said, the report is accurate in the fact that tenants in apartment XYZ were playing their music too loud, but you are claiming the comments about their race are false? I got a yes answer every time. Around the seventh report, I think the wife caught on. She started complaining that I was dragging it out. I just smiled politely and reminded her that this was my time and she had ample opportunity to object and ask me questions, but only after I was done. Then I went through the rest and let them build a defense. After I was done getting them to admit to lies, I informed them that tenants in said apartment were actually out of the country at the time of those 18 reports, and the tenants provided proof that they were gone. My officers checked the apartment once a night and confirmed that it was empty. Then I smiled pleasantly and ended my part, but the look on their faces was a mix of anger and fear. They didn't have a defense, basically saying myself and the manager were choosing immigrants over Americans. Oh, did I mention the manager is an immigrant? That went over like a hand grenade in a collection plate. Once they said that, she stopped it and told them she was, and that made matters worse because they said she was just taking up for her own kind. During this, I remained calm and collected. Inside my mind, I'm thinking, oh crap. After a few more racial remarks, the manager just stopped them and said guilty, and she would process the eviction paperwork with the courts in the morning. Long story short, they were given 14 days. From what I heard, the judge gave them 30 days until they called him a racial name. I was able to call the nice Asian couple and let them know that it was over, and they didn't have to worry because we would no longer respond to calls about their apartment for the next 14 days until eviction came through and the bad tenants left. But they were welcome to call any time if they needed help or had an issue. Security officers want to help so bad but are limited by either laws, property management rules, or both, so it is nice to do some good. The next one is a petty revenge story. So when I was 13, I was really into snowboarding, so every chance I got, I was out doing that in winter. Though in recent years I could do so in July. There was one huge hill that was open to anyone, everyone all year long, so long as they didn't cut trees or wreck the place. This hill was located on a plot of land in the woods that, a few months prior to this event, had gone from being for sale to bought by my uncles to keep it from being bulldozed. Nobody really knew these men were my uncles because we all have different last names, and my dad's family is huge. That comes up again later. One of the parents said that myself, anybody who wasn't a baby in a sled, had no right to be there as we were too big and violent to be using that hill, and generally let the kids steal or otherwise damage the board/skis or do things to drive everyone else away. I largely didn't care because when I went there I just used my cheap $10 board that was built about as well as a plastic sled, so I didn't have to carry my bigger, better one across town. That, as you can imagine, pissed these Karens off more. I never really understood why they were so butthurt over it. They could take their kids sledding anywhere, and there were even public roads that were shut down in winter because they were too dangerous to drive on that people used all the time as sled spots. That were also much closer to home and safer because no tree line to collide with, fallen logs, or chances of coyotes deciding their kids were snacks. After about a week of them constantly nagging and idioting, I finally said, look, you can sled anywhere you want. Me? Because some assholes decided to wreck property and trespass, I cannot even snowboard on my own property because the neighbors complain that I might break their fence. So unless I want to pay hundreds of dollars to go to some fancy resort, this is the only place I can snowboard. On a plot of land half a mile wide, I'm fairly sure we can all enjoy it. I didn't wait for a response. I just went on down the hill, swerving to avoid all the kids who think laying down in the middle of a place everyone is skiing, snowboarding, or sledding is a good idea, and thought that would be it. But as you can guess, I was wrong. I was never the best at stopping, so I stopped when I hit the trees, thankful that they were still rather bendy. Over the sounds of laughter and snow being shredded, I heard the Karen screaming and turned to see her at the top of the hill, pointing at me and calling me every name in the book. Apparently she called her husband, who confirmed they lived nearby, and said that one. I had threatened her too. I had called her everything in the book, and 3. I was a grown adult. At 13, I was maybe 3'9" and looked like I was 10. Her husband had to fight laughter when he saw me stomping back up the hill, wearing a hot pink Barbie snowsuit and carrying a cheap Monster Energy, black with electric green board under my arm. He asked what I had said. I repeated it and admitted I knew cursing was wrong, but expressed how annoyed I was. He tried to calm his wife, but she screamed more and said, "I'm calling the landowners." I smiled like the Cheshire Cat and told her, "Go right ahead, I'll speak to them too." So she did, and she launched into a huge rant, very animated with lots of flailing and hopping similar to an angry hen. Finally, when she starts losing steam, I can hear one of my uncles saying, "I'll be right there, sit tight." The crappy smile that spread across her face when she heard that she sneered at me and said, "I'm going to get you in so much trouble." Her husband had gathered the kids and told them to wait in the truck by then. He looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and die of embarrassment. After about 15 minutes, a truck pulled up, and out hopped my uncles. They came over and spoke to the woman. I could tell they didn't 100% believe her, but because this was their land, if anything happened, they'd be on the hook for it. She got loud again and demanded I be banned for life and all that. They looked around and asked her to point to the dangerous and disrespectful woman, as clearly I was the only one snowboarding that day. She huffed and grabbed me, giving me a shake as she shouted, "This idiot here!" Despite it being the middle of January, I swear I heard crickets as the wheels in their heads turned. Knowing these men and how much like their own kid they saw me, it was mostly to keep from yeeting this woman into the sun. Finally, one of them spoke. "You mean our niece?" Karen sputtered and tried to come up with some sort of response, but failed miserably. My uncles then gave her the choice. Leave now and come back in a couple of days. They'd drive by to make sure she stayed away. Or continue acting how she was, and they'd press charges on her to have her banned and charged with assault for grabbing me, as well as being on the hook for any damages her kids caused to anybody's gear. Apparently, they'd been getting calls, but nobody knew her name, so the cops couldn't do anything. She huffed and stormed off, her husband following and looking like a beaten dog. She never did come back. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I'm a customer service manager for a very large entertainment broadband company. Part of my job is listening to calls raised by my agents in relation to complaints, etc. One of my agents had a customer on the line going mental about her daughter's phone and broadband services being restricted for not paying. The customer claims the last person she spoke to said her bill would be cleared, and she didn't have to pay. So I listened to that call, and the customer was awful from the get-go. She was making fun of the advisor's name, the name being Merlin, and making jokes about her being a wizard and how stupid her name was mainly. She was shouting at her for over an hour about how we've committed fraud because we won't read her daughter's bank details out on the call to her. She then started going mad when the advisor told her we couldn't take payment because 3 different credit cards were declined on the account in 3 different months. The abuse went on for 1 hour and 45 minutes, and I felt so bad for the advisor at this point. The customer started going mental that her daughter never had credit cards, again claiming that we had committed fraud, and she was coming to the agent's call center to find her. When the agent asked how we could possibly have committed fraud, the customer put her foot in it, went into a rage, and then told her she let her daughter, who's only 17, go into the store and take the broadband contract with us. The customer knew she had to be over 18, and it was our fault for not doing our checks and so on. Her daughter came on the line screaming just as badly as her too. Our customers need to be 18 plus to have contracts with us, and we run basic debt checks to see if they have defaulted accounts with us, but nothing more. After raising the account to the fraud team, I had the pleasure of calling them back to tell them they were canceled with immediate effect. Of course, she started screaming at me until I told her I wasn't here to be screamed at. It clearly wasn't up for discussion, and that I'd be hanging up. If she'd been nice and not acted like she was on a pedestal and untouchable, then the services wouldn't have been canceled. Don't you love it when loudmouthed Karens shoot themselves in the foot? The next one is an entitled people story. This morning I was out mowing my lawn. I happened to be wearing a ratty t-shirt with a logo from a video game that I enjoy playing. We live in a very small town in northern Wisconsin, and everyone just kind of minds their own business, so we have never had much interaction with any of our neighbors, which is fine with us. One of the houses next to ours is a rental property that the owners converted into a duplex. The bottom half is empty, and there are two adults, a man and a woman, living in the upper unit with two kids. I have never spoken to the parents, as they have never made an attempt to even give the neighbor wave when we see them outside. However, this morning the mom starts walking over towards me, so I stop the lawnmower and say good morning. She comments about how we have such a big house. I tell her it is because we like having lots of pets, 4 cats and 2 dogs, and that we usually adopt animals with medical issues since I am a nurse, and my niece is a vet. We make a little more chit-chat and go about finishing mowing the lawn. I go inside to do some other chores and I hear a knock on the door. I check the cameras and there are 2 kids standing at my door. I have a policy of not interacting with children who do not have a parent with them, especially because I'm a gay man, and with the current political state, I believe it's better to be safe than sorry. So I ignore the knocks and continue with my chores. A few minutes go by and the woman I spoke to earlier in the yard is standing there, so I open the door. She is upset that I ignored her children when they came over, as they wanted to play with our pets. I told her that I would never allow children in my house without a parent with them, and that our pets were not toys for her children to play with. She then asked if they could play video games since I must be a gamer, because of the shirt I had on. I reiterated that I would never allow children without an adult with them in our home. She then starts talking about needing some alone time because her boyfriend left her, and she's the only one on the lease due to his bad credit, and she cannot afford her rent, and she just needs some time to herself. I apologize that she is having a rough time, but my husband and I would not be willing to entertain her children for her. She looked perplexed for a bit, and I was curious as to what confused her, and then she said something that made me lose my temper. She said, "Gross, why do fags have to be my neighbors?" I replied, "Look here, you nasty person, you will never say that to me or my husband again. You need to leave right now." And I slammed the door in her face. She kept pounding on our door, screaming all kinds of slurs and obscenities. Because we have had some issues with kids destroying property, we have cameras all over the outside of our house. So I turned on the alarm on all of them. She got the message then and left. Like, what the actual heck? I have never been so glad to have cameras everywhere outside. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you